Hello, everyone, and thank you very much, Marilyn, for joining us today as the speaker. Please, you have the floor.
Okay. Everyone, I cannot see chat when I'm showing the display, but I'd like you to write down any questions that occur to you so that you won't forget. And we'll have a long question period, I hope, because I know that's valuable to people. I'm Marilyn Saarni. I live actually in Richmond, but inside of Sobrante Valley. I just recently got certified by ReScape in Resilient Regenerative Firescaping. I'm also a UC Master Gardener, but I'm not doing this presentation as a UC Master Gardener. It's not official. Okay, so I wanted to talk about prioritizing and what defensible space concepts generally, and design approaches to FireWise gardening. I have actually skimped on that, but we can talk about it as a discussion, and plant recommendations. And I will be happy to work on that plant recommendation list and expand it. What's not on the list is how to harden your home. I have these resources here, and if perhaps Sohaila could copy those into chat, or I can send them to you later. So prioritizing what's first. It's walk to the front of your house and look back. And then I want you to first evaluate. Can responders read your address number? Do you have plants in front of your address number? And this is really important. You may have to fix your addresses and make sure they're visible from the street. Make sure they're 8 inches tall at least, and add a reflective material or a light if possible. Then look at the 2 closest fire hydrants. And the fire hydrants have to be free of vegetative matter around all sides. And it should be free from the hydrant to the sidewalk or street. And it turns out, this is a basic of FireWise landscaping, in the sense that the firemen are not going to come to your house if the fire hydrant isn't clear of flammables. It's as simple as that. It also means no wood chip, no mulches or anything, as well as no plants within a few feet. And then, is there a direct, wide, and obvious access to your house structure? Do you have plants hanging over your walkways or way? Do you have clutter in the way? And here the case is, you have to think about a dark night situation. There are embers flying, there are heavy smoke, it's hard to see, and firefighters need to be able to bring in gear or drive a fire truck up your driveway. They're going to check for the street to see if they will be safe before they will come up. They require a staging area, and unless they can stage directly at the street. So what you need to do is think about removing trees that are too close to your entry passage, because they're hanging over, and that means they would be potentially clipping with a fire truck, or embers are falling down and from the area and maybe catching fire. And then you need to prune back any overhanging foliage. You want to add lights or reflective stakes if you have a long driveway. Some of the people in our neighborhood have that. And you want to fix any paths that are broken up. Don't trip the firemen. And then you want to widen paths to your front entry. If they're less than 36 inches, they ask for 48 inches wide in the recommendations from the state. But I want you to know, Richmond firefighter told me that 36 inches is fine, but he doesn't like less because his backpacking gear is heavy and big, wide. So here's some possible, some situations which the firemen are not going to be real happy about. The one on the left has a really broken up entryway and could really trip them. though otherwise it's a pretty open entry. The next one, I guess it's a little hard to see, but those are actually poured separate steps that are each at a different height. And the railing is not safe. Plus you have overhanging trees, you have power lines, and there's no flat space for staging. This happens to be in an area where the occupants are told to evacuate, and the fire department figures that it probably will not save these houses, which is an interesting approach for a fire department. Hold on a second, I have to let my dog out. Abby. I'm sorry about that. And then in the lower left, you see a broad expanse of juniper. There's a driveway that is going up underneath that oak tree to the right. And then it goes up where you see a carport to the left. There is a flat area there. The problem is that overhanging oak tree and all that juniper is just asking for trouble. And a fire truck is not going to even attempt to save this house. It's unfortunate because they went partway through the tasks. You can see they cleared at the sidewalk. The fire hydrant is available, but a fire truck cannot, and the firefighters cannot assure their own safety. And on the right, hey, there are a whole bunch of wooden crates in the driveway. There's clutter. And this is my house. I feel like this was a good picture of what not to do. And a dead tree hanging partially over the driveway. Whoops, missed one. These are well-designed safe entries, and you can see really, the one on the left is a fresh build in the area of Oakland where there were wildfires. And you have a nice level entry for the firemen to stage right in front of the of the garage entrance. And then down that rail, there's no overhanging clear matter. There's only cement 5 feet to 8 feet away from the house. The railings are steel, they're not wood. This is probably one of the best places I saw in all Oakland Hills for careful design. The one on the right has lawn. Lawn is not considered flammable. And you can see there's nothing of a growing high in front of the house. And I cut off the driveway, but there's an open driveway on the left. This is a level entry. The trees are limbed up. That is cement siding, by the way, on the house. The lower left corner, they have succulents. They have a broad, open, flat driveway that they can use for staging. The house on the right, which is also in the Berkeley Hills, their approach to having what is very much a high risk siding, which is redwood shingle, is to fill in with the pavers here. And they also created a great staging area for any firemen to approach and protect their house. By the way, look to the left edge of that photo. That is a water feature. This was actually a really delightful entry. So what's urgent before next season? Well, you want to remove dead or dying trees. You want to remove any trees within 5 feet of your of structures. And believe me, that's where there's a lot of pain for all of us. Remove branches that hang over your roof or are within 10 feet of the chimney. and remove highly flammable plants. And here I have a list of juniper, thuja, pine trees, but it's actually probably any conifers within 30 feet of your structures. And also rosemary and overgrown plantings with a lot of dead stuff in the middle should be removed or thinned out. Privet is, by the way, one of the ones that seemingly is fire resistant, but with age becomes a problem. Within the 30 feet of your house, oh, this is prioritizing what's easy to do. Within 30 feet of your house, change from using organic mulches like shredded bark or wood chip and bark chip to rock, gravels, stone, or well-rotted compost. Within 5 feet of your house, you really should be using non-flammable hard materials such as rock, gravel, and stepping stones. And that's the easy way to handle that zone. You can add in non-flammable plantings sparingly. And what I have found is that succulents, bulbs, and low-growing annuals, especially when they are likely to be done by the time wildfire season comes around. So you would just pick the seed for next season and cut them away, cut them down. Clear all dried plant debris within 30 feet of your house. I hope that's easy. If it's inside of a plant, I know that's not so easy. And limb up. Remove lower branches or leaves up to 6 feet on larger trees and shrubs around the home. And I just want to remind people, don't remove more than a third at a time or you're likely to kill your plant. And this doesn't apply necessarily to backyard orchard trees. So defensible spaces. There are 3 zones in most firefighter language. There's a 0 to 5 foot zone, which firefighters would prefer no plants whatsoever, but at least it's easy enough to make, say, 98% of it hard zone. If you, we're so used to foundational plantings as an aesthetic. I think the biggest problem is changing your mindset. And then there's the 5 to 30 foot zone, which is called the lean and green zone. In this case, the third picture at the bottom shows you that 5 to 30 foot zone. 30 to 100 foot zone, you have aggressive vegetation controls, fire load, but you can have trees. This is actually a wildland edge issue here. The property on the far right has several oak trees on a slope. And you can't tell, but there's a house beyond that fence at the top. And they have come in here and actually limbed up trees, trimmed up. You can see they've done a pretty good job, actually. And they have removed as much vegetation as possible. We're now out of the wildfire season, so they haven't done a recent raking, but earlier they had basically bare dirt. This is a great resource. Anytime you guys have questions, I often find myself coming to readyforwildfire.org for resources on zoning. They're very good for home hardening recommendations and materials, but this is their zoning rules. They only go with 2 zones. But when you talk to other firefighters, they always talk about 3. So in the lean and green zone, which is 5 to 30 feet, this is one way of starting in the questions to ask yourself. You should assess your current garden. Is it easy to maintain? Because I'll tell you, a lot of plants are FireWise if you have plenty of time to work on them. But if you don't, that eliminates many plants that might otherwise be considered FireWise appropriate. Do you have fire breaks in the zone? This is that concept of having paths. You see the third picture here has a path there. There is another section that is a dry, a rain garden, I guess you would call it, that has a lot of stone that's on the other side. There's a rock wall. I'm not going to talk about slopes, but there, anytime you have a slope and you put in terraces and rock walls, you reduce the height of flames that are coming up the slope. So that's what that's about when I say fire breaks. Do you have a well-maintained lawn? That's really excellent for FireWise gardening. And if you are concerned about droughts, and the upcoming year is going to be a challenge, I think, for us, you can let it die, but just be sure to mow it short. We do now have California native turf-derived lawns. I don't have those recommendations and references here, but I can answer the, send that some sources later. A vegetable garden, not in the first 5 feet, but a vegetable garden generally is well hydrated and well maintained. So it's actually pretty good FireWise gardening. Do you have working irrigation or are you hand watering? And this is a consideration if in case you find you don't have time to hand water everything. And we're going to have a dry year coming up, so this is going to be more challenging. Do you have any conifers in this zone? Well, I think I've already mentioned, if you do, this is a huge problem, and you're probably going to have to get rid of all of them to really be able to maintain your property in a safe manner. Do you have hedges? Hedges provide a continuous flammable zone. And so this can be a super big challenge. This also goes for vines and climbers potentially. If you have a freestanding trellis that is 15 feet away from your house and doesn't touch anything, then your vine could be made safe, or your rose climber or whatever. But if it's anywhere close to where it could allow flames to climb into trees, it's going to be disastrous. And I had cut down a evergreen clematis recently because it built up too much debris, and it was right next to my neighbor's garage, and it was just too much of a threat. What kinds of trees do you have? Do the trees' canopies touch each other? This gets back to breaking up continuous canopy. And you don't have to have every tree not touching each other. You can cluster trees, but then you need to provide a larger zone of no canopy touching outside of that cluster. And for trees, do you have plants underneath that are touching the canopy, which is really not safe, or within 6 feet? This is a concept where to break the fire ladder, you want to have 6 foot vertical clearance whenever possible. And then below windows and near doorways and sliding doors, garage doors, whatever, what kinds of plants do you have? And this gets back to, you want to be particularly careful to have low flammable plants in the area, or even an extra wide zone of non-flammable mulch, such as gravel. So, and then This is just a reminder. This is housekeeping. Do you have wood stacked in this zone? You'll need to move it. And as one person had pointed out to me recently, when the wildfire season has ebbed and it's then wood burning, wood fires and your fireplace time, you can bring in the wood a little bit, what you need a little bit closer to the house. The other one is no garbage cans stored in this zone. That is so darn hard in this neighborhood. I haven't figured out how to do it. We have plastic garbage cans, and we don't have an option of using a metal garbage cans. And if anyone has suggestions, I want to hear them later. So here are some 0 to 30 foot zones. Or actually, these are 5 to 30 foot zones as well. And you can see we have areas where we have a combination of, I have to confess, shredded bark, but long-term shredded bark. And it's been there a couple of years on the left with gravel and compost and very low growing plants and a rock wall for that matter. Then there's flagstones. And then in the lower right, this is a garden that is a very well-planned FireWise garden. That is a Palo Verde tree. And as it's been growing, they have begun to limb it up. You can see they have a bunch of cacti and so forth in there. You can see some flowers on the far right edge of that. That is, I think that's a yucca, I'm not sure. And then the center one shows you how wrong you can go in this zone. Not only that, that's creosote soaked logs. And this homeowner is actually in the process of trying to figure out what to start with first. And on the far right, this is a zone where they've tried to keep things low. This happens to be a particularly dangerous kind of tree to have because it has this wonderful drop dead gorgeous bark that has many crevices in it. The tree is very drought resistant. And one thing I did notice is it doesn't drop a lot of leaves, even in summer. But this will be a challenge for that gardener. So I'm going to skip the 30 to 100 because I realize not that many of us have such huge property around here. And I was running out of time. So I wanted to talk about gardens and transitions. I just wanted to show you that in this particular, just a couple of examples real quick here. I took out tons of juniper, and it was far less painful than you might think because I made the discovery that when you cut juniper trunks to the ground flush, they do not resprout. But I wanted to show you how quickly things can move along. So here's a succulent bed. I think once we got the area cleared, I was able to plant and put in this gravel in about 2 4-hour sessions. The far two right pictures, my poor pine tree died, Japanese black pine. There's an interesting story, but I won't go into that. And below is that same bed about 7 months later. And you can see it's where I try out plants that I think are FireWise and look at how they maintain. You can see that they certainly don't miss that pine tree. That's Mexican evening primrose, that's pink. And on the far right, far upper right corner, you can see some white flowers. That's Santa Barbara daisy. And then there's also teucrium and hardy green ice plant. Here's another transition. Well, now you can see, this is a better sequence in some ways. There's the juniper. And the prior owner of my home was a wonderful gardener. She was here until she was 92. But you can see the house has all this foundational gardening, foundational plantings. It has a U in front of the, right next to the garage, driveway, garage door. And there's a giant juniper on the right-hand side that was next to my neighbor's driveway. And they were so thankful to have me cut that down. And then, as is true in most of El Sobrante Valley, there was juniper all the way along the front. And juniper does have some virtues, by the way, not appropriate for our neighborhood, but deer don't eat it. And that's a biggie. And it's very drought resistant. I did make an effort, by the way, you can see, to try to keep it open underneath the junipers. It just was too hard to maintain. And anyhow, I have my son there doing the work. Please note, he's using shredded cedar bark, which is not what you're supposed to use, but I didn't know. And then on the lower right is, after we've put in the courtyard, taken out the olive tree, which turned into a problem. And sadly, I had to take out all but 2 of my giant camellias that I had around my front. I'm just going to skip right to FireWise plant and maintenance suggestions at this point, because again, I'm afraid of running out of time. There's no clock on this. Did you guys notice that? I have never noticed before. One of my big favorites is Erigeron glaucus Wayne Roderick. And it grows, about 12 inches tall. When you do a first initial planting, you should plant them maybe about 12 to 18 inches apart, but they do spread. They're wonderful pollinator attractants, and you'll get butterflies and bees of all sorts. It's really probably one of my best pollinator plants in my garden. Achilleum millefolium, this version here, and I could not find the name for it, is actually a low growing variety. This one grows about 12 inches tall, and you'll notice the flowers are short stalked. What I liked about this particular Achilleum millefolium, which is a California native, albeit I think this might be a horticulture variant. In fact, I know it is that what I was going to say, the Achilleum, it doesn't build up a lot of dead debris in it, and yet until late in the season, and you can always just clean it up, by November and December for next year, and it'll come back. Very hardy, drought resistant. It won't need much water to keep it hydrated enough to keep it FireWise and lush enough as FireWise. Succulents. Almost all succulents work. There are some succulents that build up debris underneath. And in fact, I have an Aloe nobilis that I'll be lifting, as well as Aeonium. It's the dish plate size Aeoniums. But to keep that debris at a safe level, we're talking about 3 to 5 year cleanup cycles. I love the Arctotis pink sugar, which is on the right. That's another one that brings in a lot of pollinators, and it will spread. This came from one plant. It's probably about 7 or 8 plants now. So it's easy to propagate and take starts and move it elsewhere in your yard. It's also drought resistant, and it flowers and flowers and flowers. And my recommendation for maintenance on this one is if you don't keep it watered and it starts getting ratty, just simply pull up everything, keep about 5 nice starts, put them back in and throw out the rest. I wanted to include a few trees. One tree that I've become a great admirer of, it's drought resistant, a great pollinator. I can say it's a California native, but it's native to Southern California, and that's the desert willow. I have an example of a tree that's in a parking lot, but I wanted you to have a sense of its shape. It will get to maybe 15 to 20 feet big, wide, and maybe about 15 feet wide. You can see the flowers, exquisite. Crepe myrtles are great. They have tree trunks that do not have peeling bark. They're very smooth. It's very easy to limb them up. And they are also relatively drought resistant. The thing to remember about crepe myrtles is you can't stop watering them altogether, which I'm finding is it's going to be a big challenge for the next year. You always want to keep your trees watered in a drought. You can let the rest of your garden go, but not your trees. It's a big cost, among other things. Then there's Gaillardia blanket flower, another great pollinator. This is a plant that is actually going to spread on you. So I followed instructions, and if I had realized they were so misleading, but it's not invasive, and you can break up the clumps and spread them out. So it's, when you put in your first plant, it's going to grow about 12 inches tall and about 18 inches wide. That Teucrium ackermanni, I realize it's not, I caught it a little bit late. It has a gorgeous lavender bloom. It has a silvery gray foliage, which, by the way, not only means that's an adaptation for hot areas and drought resistance, because it reflects light and thereby reduces evaporation. But it also often is an indicator of increased mineral in the leaves. And that happens to be the case for Teucrium ackermanni. This is only about 10 inches tall and about 3 feet wide. It is drop dead gorgeous and covered with bees when it blooms, which is about 3 to 4 weeks. The rest of the time, I trim off the dead blooms, which is what you're seeing that's brown here. Is done, and that gray mound. And then 2 salvias I have here, or sage. Salvia blue spires, which I'm sure a lot of people have seen. It's a horticulture variant, but it's a very hardy plant. And when it begins to get a little scroungy, you can cut it back. What I have found for FireWise gardening, I've had to cut back a lot more frequently to take out dead debris and stuff. Well, this salvia blue spires, I can cut it back twice and it comes back blasting. So what a great payoff, right? And pineapple sage, and I bet a lot of people here are familiar with pineapple sage. I wanted to start with ground covers in my own, and this is where I didn't finish, but here are some. The one on the left is a ground cover violet. And there are lots of violets that turn into ground covers if allowed. This one is only about 4 or 5 inches wide, but will probably, if you put in about 5 plants in a cluster, they'll cover an area of about 5 square feet in a season. They're very fast growing. You can see, by the way, there's some achillea mixed in, or yarrow. That's the feathery stuff. The next plant over is actually a sedge. It's Carex diversicola. And I believe this one's actually from the Middle West, but it's a low growing variety. There are a couple of different heights on this one. And this one only grows about 12 inches tall. And it turns out they stay in a nice tight little clump, but what happens is I find I have to trim them because otherwise they'll want to grow about 24 inches wide with their mounding fronds. This is really a surprisingly fire-resistant plant and is easy to maintain, but I do find I have to cut it back twice a year. And then on the right, I have two favorites. I have Diamondia and Dichondra. It was an accident that the two grew together. And you can see the Dichondra is more aggressive, but both of these plants are great for erosion control. So I have several plant lists, and we'll make sure to get this text out, or maybe you can do a screenshot if you want. These plant lists, I just want everyone to be always aware that the safest way to go is to make sure you see the plant you're looking at on multiple lists. I didn't write down FireWise plant qualities, and I sure wish I had the time for it, but I will describe them basically. If you have a lush tropical type, it means you have to water it more, most likely, but that high water content makes that plant more fire resistant. Silvery gray foliage often is an indicator of mineral content, and higher mineral content can reduce the flammability of a plant. And you need to be very careful about plants with high oil content. And this can include actually a surprising number of herbs, but plenty of other herbs are fine. One of the herbs you have to be really careful of, though, is juniper. I mean, not juniper, sorry. Boy, is that right in the front of my brain. It's the herb you would use. Okay, it starts with a J, and I put juniper in my head, I've got. And lavender is another one you have to be careful of. Lavender is fine for the first couple of years, but then as it grows older, it gets woody. So if you want to use the bigger lavenders, like the angustifolia type, you can just plan on having to remove them in 2 years. Or you can try using some of the miniature lavenders like Hidcoat. So, whoops, I think I have more pictures, but I think that's the end of my show. Yep, there's some other, oh, I forgot to talk about bulbs. Oops, something happened there. Sorry, guys. There's a strategy for doing wildfire-wise gardening where you use plants that die off by the time wildfire season comes. And so bulbs are always safe, as are short-lived California native annuals in the springtime. And yep, I think that's about all I'm going to say about that. Anyhow, let me back out of here. I don't have to share screen anymore. And we're going to stop that.
Marilyn, the pictures are beautiful. You can keep them. And there are a couple of questions. I'm going to read them to you one by one.
Thank you.
Is, of course, Do you have suggestions for approaching a neighbor about a pine on their property that is within 30 feet of our house?
Yes. You know, I'll tell you what I think, Steve. I think there actually has to be regulation in this regard, or law, because for other people to endanger your property just should not be allowed. Actually, I think one of the pictures I have on here shows a situation where there's a pine tree on somebody else's property that's hanging over their house. I actually don't know what to do, because I'm actually dealing with the same problem, only this is a tree that also overhangs power lines. I can't even get PG&E on board. So I am told that at this point, we cannot really get, because we don't have those kinds of regulations, which, by the way, apparently are now in place for many communities in wildfire zones throughout California and Colorado and Idaho and Oregon and so forth. Somehow it's just not happening here. And I think Sohaila and you both know that this is the big push I think we're going to have for the next 5 years in organizing.
I should add, actually, I had a similar problem with my neighbor. What I did, I asked the city fire prevention inspector to come by and give him a notice, and they did. The county does the same. And the good news is that the county is hiring 7 or 8 more fire inspectors next season.
Yeah, that's going to be really great. And I am dealing with an absentee property owner. So that's why it's like he doesn't understand how dangerous the tree is.
Yeah, once they get a fine, hopefully they'll realize.
Yeah.
And by the way, we're going to invite PG&E safety specialists to hear the concerns by the neighborhood. So stay tuned, hopefully in January.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, the next question is interested in general flammability of green, healthy coast live oak. In our case, outer perimeter of branches reach into the 5 to 10 feet edge of our 2-story house at heights of 10 to 20 feet.
Yep, that's a big problem. And you know, coastal live oaks are so magnificent, but they're also a specialty in pruning. And this is a case where you really don't want it touching your house. And I have heard I think we're in a case of changing guidelines. I have heard you know, some experts say, well, the guidance is you can have 10-foot vertical clearance between a coastal live oak branch and the roof. And then I heard someone else say, no, nothing overhangs the house. Nothing touches the house. You should actually have 10 feet between any tree canopy and your house. So this is a case where you know, perhaps having an arborist come and saying how they can best handle keeping it away from your house and yet keep an aesthetic shape. That's a hard one. And coastal live oaks, you really do want to be careful how you might prune them, because they're sensitive to so many disease issues. Does that help at all?
I've muted everyone. I bet it does. Thank you. The next question is there anything dangerous about old spark arrestor?
All what? Sorry?
Old spark arrestor.
Oh, yes, there is. It turns out and I just had somebody check my spark arrestor and tell me I have to replace it. I'm like, and I was so annoyed because it's only about 9 years old, but it turned out they changed the screen size from when it was installed. So now, if you can, and it shouldn't be a very hard job for someone who can climb up on their own roof to replace it. But you want to make sure you have 1/8 to 1/16 inch screen on your spark arrestor. The old ones were, they do let sparks out.
Thanks. The next question, actually, this starts by saying, great information. Thank you. I have a question. I have a slope that's covered with juniper. Do you have a suggestion for a fast growing plant to replace it with?
Yes, I will say plants with a plural. Slopes are always a big issue because of erosion potential and slide. And actually, we're not at a bad time because we're having such a strange fall or winter when you could put in a cover crop. And then there are different kinds of cover crops. And oh boy, you know, I'm thinking that there's some California native blends I was thinking of, which has a lot of annuals mixed with very short grasses. And believe it or not, that is a good potential, a ground cover. If you cut your juniper now, you can cut it flush, like I was saying. Please either hire people who know what they're doing so they don't get hurt, or be sure to wear long sleeves and gloves, and a thick jacket is even better, heavy jeans, because juniper can cause a skin reaction at both the foliage and fresh cuts. So anyone who's dealing with that, I want to give that warning. The thing is, if you cut your juniper now and put out a cover crop, you probably would still need netting for this winter, but you have the advantage that the soil be held in by the dying roots of the juniper. You won't have that advantage probably within 2 years. So a lot of people don't think about that. By the way, one of these pictures in this last this last slide here with the rocks, she is taking out all of her juniper little by little, and my heart goes out to her because it's such a miserable job, and she has a big slope, and she has plants, and they failed. So I think there's a lot to be said for a cover crop situation that you might have to mow, that you would probably want to mow to keep it short and just for erosion control. But that way you can start putting in plants after the drought season, because we are probably going into a bad drought this coming year. And so I hesitate to suggest anything long-term at the moment.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.